Guys, welcome back. Here we are. It is another week of Overwatch League. So, we're in stage 4, week number 3. After this week, we only got 2 more until playoffs. Um, it was an absolutely wild week, and once again, we're going to start off by looking at the power rankings by Mr. Jonathan Reinforce Larson. And these were interesting ones. We saw, it was the week of upsets in the first 2 seasons of Overwatch League. It was probably the craziest. Saturday, Sunday was the craziest thing that we've seen with teams like London, um, Vancouver, and New York losing to teams far below them in the standings. We have Washington Justice move up all the way to fifth in the power rankings at the moment, even though they are 5-19 and mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. So I would like to quickly address. Some people have expressed frustration about the fact that teams could be very good in this stage in this meta and still not be able to make it to the playoffs. Um, for example, the Washington Justice. Um, they've already won a good amount of their games this stage. They frankly dominated the Titans. They dominated them. It was not close. At any time was that match close. So the big thing I want to talk about with that is think about it in the context of other sports. I know it's different because the meta changes in this, and it doesn't in other sports like baseball. If your team is bad for the first 120 games, and then you go on a tear your last like 42ish, and then you finish those 42 games like way above 500, but you were way below 500 for the other 120. That doesn't mean you should get into the playoffs. So that's one thing we have to remember, that even though there are teams that are a lot better and worse in this meta, um, that we still have to consider the 3 stages of mostly GOAT's meta. These are still important. You can't, just because you're good in this meta doesn't mean you should be rewarded more than the other 3 stages. The Justice and a lot of the other teams couldn't win games in the GOAT's meta, so no matter what they're doing now, it's just too late. And I have zero problem with that. The one thing that I would bring up is maybe in the future, this is hard because they don't want to focus too much on Overwatch League and completely neglect like the rest of the player base, but trying to split up, like maybe do half the season in one meta and then you just change it for the other half, or keep the same meta the whole season. Um, but you could also make the argument, well, that's on the teams. You have to make a roster that's flexible enough so that they can be good in different types of metas. Which I don't have a problem with that either. These are definitely all things to consider. We're gonna have Sigma out in the playoffs, so that things could change again in the playoffs themselves. So um, remember, it is a 28 match season. No matter what we see, these 7 games, the first 21 still matter. Um, if if they had been a 500 team going into this stage, then they'd be in super good shape. But they didn't do that, so um, this stage doesn't really matter, even though they look very good. Corey looks like an absolute monster. I was actually gonna make a whole separate video about like the whole thing with the new meta and talking about like the teams and whatnot. But then I was like, in theory it sounded good, but then in actuality it just kind of sounded like me saying, "Oh, I told you this, I told you that," because I think a lot of the a couple things have played out like I thought they would. Vancouver being not as good, um, and a couple of those other teams like Shanghai and but like some things didn't play out like I expected. Like New York, New York is a lot worse than I thought they would be. Chengdu looks a lot better than I thought they would. So it has been a crazy ride so far. But now we're going to go look at the schedule. Um, Also, the other big thing is we have to remember that in this type of meta where DPS is so important, you can just DPSs can just carry. I think probably my least favorite thing about the goats meta is it was so infrequent for upsets to occur because goats was very much about just managing your abilities, managing your ultimates, and communicating when to use those. So the teams that were very good at it would execute on it basically every single week, and the teams that weren't good at it just wouldn't. So the teams like Vancouver, like Florida, they would just keep losing, and the teams like San Francisco and Vancouver and New York would just keep winning. So in this meta, you see a lot more variance because there's so many talented players in this league. I mean, I honestly I don't think Washington's a top five team. I really don't. Corey had one of the best games I've ever seen a player have. But does that mean they're a top five team? I don't think so. I really don't. So, I mean, we saw Florida pop off. They're of course they were going to be a dangerous team. They have Sia player. So these are all things to consider. And we just don't want to. I don't want everyone to get too carried away with these upsets and think, oh man, we're gonna have teams that are bad in the playoffs and some teams that are better that aren't gonna be in the playoffs at all, and that's dumb. I personally do not agree with that at all. But enough of that. Just something for you guys to think about. We're gonna look at the games for these next couple days. So, two teams coming off of hard losses. You got Vancouver versus London. I'm going to take London here. My problem with Vancouver is essentially what I said coming in. Um, Hacksaw is going to be a monster, but Bumper is average. Janu isn't going to have as big of an impact in this meta, even though he's still very good. Slime isn't going to be as impactful in this meta. Twilight will still be incredibly good. Twilight and Haxel will still make this team an upper tier team, but they're not clear cut number one or two anymore. I think they're more like in the 6 to 8 range at the moment. But I mean, London super inconsistent at all times. Essentially the reason I'm going with London is I like Prophet and Birdring more than Hureg and Haxal. Haxal is so good on the Genji, but you can't use him on every map. They will have Anubis, so I think Vancouver will win that map. Um, that is a very good Genji map, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks. But I just don't like Hureg. I really don't. I saw an article a couple weeks ago that was talking about him, and they called him like a star player last year. And what I remember most about Hureg is an injured, like literally injured. He was having wrist issues. Birdring, who was an extremely streaky player on an extended cold streak, still got more playtime than him. And I just think that says something. That says something about the player. So I think he's an average DPS at absolute best. Um, his Hanzo doesn't impress me at all. His Widow is decent. But otherwise, I don't trust him to be like that carry type on the team along with Haxall. And Haxall's Pharah is a little underwhelming to me. Um, his Mei hasn't looked amazing. I mean, it's the Genji. But when you can't play that, I just don't love Vancouver's flexibility and their just depth in general in terms of their DPS players. So I'm going to go with London here. They generally bounce back pretty well after one of their terrible performances. Maybe they were just kind of looking past Florida onto Vancouver. So I'm going to say London wins it in 5. I think it comes down to the wire, but Profit, mostly Profit, and Birdring are able to clutch it out for them. Then we got Paris taking on Philly. So Paris got off to a pretty decent start in the beginning of this stage, but now they've fallen off. They're essentially out of the playoffs. They have not been officially eliminated, but they could very well win their last 3 matches and still lose, and still not make the playoffs or the play-ins. So it's not looking great for them. They did look improved, but like I said, I still don't feel good enough about their tank line and their support line. I think if they could keep Soon and Shadowburn around, and you have more DPS, I mean we will have more DPS because the roll lock for next season. I think if you can build around them a bit more, maybe even get a mixed roster in. I hate to say that because I love to see that like it's Paris and it's an all European roster, but it clearly just hasn't worked. They don't have the personnel to make a playoff run. Philly has looked better. They won their last couple of matches. They're up to 14 and 11. They're actually I mean, depending on how it shakes out with like London and the Gladiators and the Spark, Philly could still snag a top 6 spot. So I think they will take this map. They still look pretty underwhelming to me. They just don't have that same Philly magic of last year. We'll see if they can kind of capture it in these last few matches. But I'll take them in a pretty, I don't want to say boring, but not the most exciting match of the week. But I take Philly 3-1. I mean, EQ has really been the standout on that team. I will have to give him credit because he's been playing very well on the Hanzo, on the May, but Carpe has not looked like himself, and the rest of that team just does not impress me. So, moving on, this is another one that's a little more. It has no playoff implications, but it is an interesting one. You got Toronto Defiant taking on Florida. Two teams that look very improved in this roll lock. I think it's going to be a great duel between former teammates, actually, and Saya Player and Logix on the Widow. But I'm going to go with Toronto here. I like them with Shark more than Yakpun. I think that him and Gods have been a nice duo. Um, Neko is still a very good, underrated flex healer. I think that 8 has been pretty solid on the main support as well. Toronto's just been solid. I mean, they took a win against Shanghai, which is pretty impressive. They took Philly down to the wire, did end up losing in a map 5, but they still had a good performance. Um, and Florida's going to have some moments. They're going to have some Saya player pop offs. One of the new additions, Gargoyle, has been really good on the off tank. He's been kind of a standout guy on the Roadhog. Has been pretty solid on the Diva as well. Um, but I'm going to take Toronto here. I do really like this roster. I think that they did actually just release their head coach, which I thought was a little strange at like now. If they had done it earlier, like after stage 2, 3, when they were just terrible, I could understand it. But now they've shown signs of improvement. But so that'll be interesting to see how that affects them going forward. But like I said, I like Toronto. I think they have a nice little team going on now. I like the moves that they've made. I'm gonna take them 3-1 in this matchup. Then one of the most like low-key intriguing matchups of the whole stage for me. We got Guangzhou Charge taking on Seoul Dynasty. So the Charge, they're in the play-ins right now. Seoul is looking. They're also in the play-ins. Seoul has the ability to jump into that top 6 if they finish strong. Guangzhou's they're not going to make the top 6, but they are in good shape for the play-ins if they just finish strong. I believe they're in 10th now. Maybe they're down to 11th because Atlanta has been winning all of their matches. But either way, they're in solid shape for the play-ins. They do still have to win a couple of their matches though. And Seoul's a nice team. I still don't like their. I don't see real championship contender in this team. I see like lower tier playoff team. I don't think Marvel quite has like the big playability, but as we've noticed, it is more on the DPS now. I think that Illicit and Fleta are a good combo. Fleta he hasn't been playing every map though. They've been using Fitz as well, so I like their DPS. I like their team. They still have Jaehong. You still have Jexe and Toby. You still have Zunba and Michelle. This is still a very good team. I'm gonna take Guangzhou here. I'm gonna go for a little bit of an upset. They've been playing very well this stage. I think Happy is going to get the better of anyone on the Widow, and Nero is a very, very good Hanzo and Mei player. So I really do like Guangzhou here. Their tank line isn't spectacular, but it doesn't really need to be in this meta, if I'm being completely honest. That's why I have a couple issues with Marvel, but I don't think it's that big of a deal with Soul, just because tanks aren't as important in this meta as they were in Goats. Um, but I don't think I would have really. I don't think I would have believed it last year if you had told me, "Oh yeah, Flood is on with two other good DPS," but one of the new teams I like their DPS is more. But I really do. I think Happy and Nero are legitimate top tier DPS, and they will carry them to a close map 5 victory in this one. Like I said, that might honestly be like my recommendation, even over Spitfire Vancouver, because who knows what's gonna happen in that match. This one, I'm like 99.9% sure it's going to be a good competitive match. So now we arrive on Washington, taking on Boston. Boston continues their free fall. Um, They're pretty much in the same boat as like Toronto and Paris. They're not officially eliminated yet, but they will be very soon. I got Washington in this one. Boston looks pretty flat to me. Um, when they signed their DPSs at the start of the season, I was like, hmm, they're okay. Blase and Color Hex, like they're good, but they don't really scare me like Stratus and Corey do. They have very good synergy, it seems. Even though Washington is not going to get their new tanks, Giannis looks way better than he did in Goats meta. He looks like a capable Orisa at least. And then their back line has still been performing well. I'm still surprised that Guido is in there. I still think Sleepy's a lot of significantly better as a player, but it might be a communication thing. And Guido has been performing these last couple weeks. I will give him that. Arc has also been much improved. I was really disappointed with his performance, honestly, after he got traded there. But this stage, he's been a lot better, similar to what he was last season. So I'm going to take Washington. I'm going to go for a 4-0 here. I think that they kind of take care of business. I think Boston is really kind of run down. They're low on morale, and they're just kind of going through the motions at this point in the season. And then we got Dallas Fuel taking on the LA Gladiators. So Dallas is now 1-8 in their last 9 matches. It has been rough. I mean, they were 9-5. They were 9-5, and now they've really fallen downhill. I believe that they were 9-5 when they took on Gladiators, or maybe no, I think they were. Either way, maybe they were 9-6 at that point. The Gladiators were one of the first teams that they started losing to on their large losing streak. And I'm gonna go with the Gladiators here. They still look a little inconsistent. They still have issues. I'm not completely sold on them yet. I don't love the strategies that they're running in terms of the DPS comps. They've been running a lot of Sombra Tracer, which just isn't very effective against the Mei. Um, so we'll see if they kind of shift that a little bit, or if they continue to kind of lean on that. Um, it is a pretty good map set for the Gladiators, and you got Lijiang, you got Kings Row, Junkertown. Dallas, I mean, Dallas has looked better in Stage 4, but I just don't think it's going to come together for them. They lost to the Valiant. That's a match that you just gotta win if you're competing for those last couple spots. They're the number 13 team right now. I think they'll probably end the season at 14, and it's kind of sad because like I was kind of rooting for this Dallas team, but I have to say I'm very disappointed in Arrow. I really am. I think that he just has this unconditional love for Zachary, and I just don't see it. He hasn't performed all season. They could have picked up so many better players this offseason, and I just don't think it's going to coalesce in time for the Fuel to win this match and any others. So I'm going to take Gladiators. I'll say 3-1. Dallas might snag like Temple or maybe Junkertown because Junkertown's always kind of a well, which Widow slash Hanzo pops off the most kind of match. So I think Gladiators get back on track after a heartbreaking loss to the Shock. And speaking of the Shock, they are playing against the Shanghai Dragons. Dragons coming off a pretty rough loss to Toronto that hurt their chances for a top 6 spot in the playoffs pretty bad. I think I think San Francisco is going to hit them with another blow here. Um, I thought San Francisco would be just as terrifying of a team to play against as they were in Goats. I think that has mostly come out to be true. I think they're not quite as dominant on this as they were in Goats, but they're still such a good team. Probably, I mean, you saw number one in the power rankings. I think I would agree with that at the moment. Sinatra is still an extremely good Tracer and Doomfist player. Architect is still extremely good at Widow and Genji. You still have Striker. You still have Rascal, who's been maybe the most underrated of all the DPS on San Francisco this year because he's just kind of he did such a good job filling in on the Brigida and on the Batiste in Goats, and now he's showing why he's one of the best Mays in the league as well. So, shocker, like I said, they're a terrifying team. Shanghai, I'm still not sold on them. Like I said, it seems like their DPSs aren't quite flexible enough, and they're not super comfortable with the Mei, Reaper, Hanzo. Even though Ding is a very good Hanzo player. But I'm going to take San Francisco in this one. I'll say it's a 3-1. I think Shanghai will snag a map and make a couple of them close. But at the end of the day, San Fran is the superior team, and they get the win. And the final match of the 2 days is Hangzhou Spark versus New York. So these are two teams that are struggling quite a bit in this stage. New York is now they're 1-2 this stage. Hangzhou is 0-2. They have yet to win a match this stage. This one is a little harder for me than I thought it'd be, but I'm taking New York. I still believe in this team. Um, they didn't look good against Chengdu though. They just really didn't. They kind of have to figure out what they're doing for this for their roster in terms of the DPS. We saw Flower for a map and he was very ineffective. We've seen Sabiobi coming in for a couple and Nene being in for a couple. We've seen Libero on pretty much every map. So I don't know. Everyone, I just see in the chat all the time when they're playing. I just see play Big Boss, let Pine play, and I'm with you guys. But I just at this point, I don't think it's happening this season. I mean, he has not touched the stage, so why would he now? Um, but yeah, this team is just still too good for me. Mono, Meko, the DPS, of course Jonak. Um, they're too good for me to give up on them yet, and Hanjo has looked terrible this stage. So I'm gonna go with New York. I think it's 3-1. This could be a bit of a messy match, but we'll see because these are two teams in the top six right now. They are in the top six. Yeah, so Hanjo's at 4 right now, and New York's at 2. So I think these teams will both figure it out in time, but New York is better. They're more experienced, and I think that they will figure it out earlier and take this win. Like I said, 3-1. So those are the matchups for the first couple days. Honestly, a lot of these matchups should be fun. I'm still loving this new meta. It hasn't completely solidified yet. I mean, the only constants that we've seen are Arisa. We've seen a lot of, even like the supports, we've seen a lot of Ana, we've seen a lot of Batiste, we've seen some Lucio, we've seen some Moira. Still seen a bit of Zen. Mercy when there is a Pharah, but that's pretty rare. Um, for tanks, we see like I said, we see mostly Orisa, a little bit of Winston, a little bit of Wrecking Ball and Control, and we've seen a lot more Roadhog, which is nice this stage. Still a bit of Diva as well. She's like the unkillable hero in terms of the meta. And then in DPS, we've seen a lot of the Hanzo play stand out. We've seen some Widow, Mei, and Reaper. So I am enjoying it. Would I like to see a little less of Mei? Sure. Not the most entertaining to watch. Definitely very frustrating to play against. But I'm still loving this stage. I hope you guys are too. Views and subs are still up, so that's amazing. Thank you guys for your patience with my ramblings. If you got any questions, any thoughts, any bold predictions, please let me know in the comments. I'm anxious to read anything you guys put out there. And without further ado, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have yourselves a great couple of days, and I'll see you in the next one.